Hildy is a bawdy, chain-smoking, 70-something former journalist who lives on the Upper West Side in an apartment that has a portal back to 1973. Time travel has rules, though, and Hildy breaks them by traveling back with healthcare aide Trista. Now both women will have to come to terms with their pasts before they lose their chance at having a future. From Ahoy Comics comes Alisa Whitney's Guilt. That's Gilt, a comic book that's Sex and the City meets the Golden Girls by way of the Twilight Zone. Call your local comic book store and ask them to order your copy of Guilt today. Hey everybody, it's Lani. Here I am this week. We do not have a new endless episode covering the comics for you today because Lisa has some stuff going on. I had some stuff going on and our schedules kind of got flown a little topsy-turvy. But because I didn't want to leave the space just empty on a Tuesday, I decided that what I would do is pull in superhero scholar Joshua Unruh, my co-host from Listen Up A-Holes, the Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast, to talk a little bit about DC Comics, to talk a little bit about the Sandman and give a little perspective on some of the things that we've been talking about so far. So this is going to be an episode that is a little bit outside of the normal, but I wanted to let you guys know that Alisa and I will be working to get these out every week as much as we can. Some weeks there may not be anything in the feed on a Tuesday, but don't worry, we are on it. And when the Netflix series comes out, we hope to be able to do that every week as the episodes come out. So for today, let me welcome Joshua Unruh to the endless stage. How you doing, man? We're going to talk about DC instead of Marvel now. Does that feel weird?
No, it feels amazing.
Are you excited?
I am excited. Okay, because I mean, I have blown with the wind over the course of my life, and I started out as a big-time Marvel zombie kid, but around about college, you know, when I matured into DC Comics.
I see.
Yeah, that's not exactly true. It was just a really perfect time for DC Comics, and it was perfect for honestly 10 or 12 years, and I just got just deep as hell into it and just became the biggest DC fan. And honestly, I mean, it's a mixed bag for both companies at the moment, comic book wise, but like as far as the stuff that just eats up all of my imagination real estate, it's probably more DC than Marvel most of the time. Just
interesting.
It's just how it works out, you know.
What do you see as the basic difference? I mean, this is kind of an interesting perspective. What is the basic difference, do you feel, in like the energy between Marvel and DC? Can you sum that up? Is that possible?
Scale. It's scale.
It's
scale. Yeah. Right from the gate, the Marvel Universe made a lot of effort to sort of be the world outside your window, right? Like it's basically New York, 1960, you know, whatever it was. And part of that was also very much giving their heroes sort of feet of clay, right? Peter Parker is an angry teenager who can't pay his damn rent. Right. You know, and being Spider-Man makes that harder, not easier, that kind of thing. A lot of the Marvel guys look like horror stories right out of the gate. We talked for the Iron Man movie that the Iron Man initial appearances are very much like this man, this monster, you know, like Tony Stark is separated from humanity because he can't let anybody know that he has to wear this breastplate to keep him alive all the time. And when he puts on the outfit, it's monstrous. But part of that, like world outside your window, heroes with clay feet, is that you wind up with everything just being a little bit smaller, you know? Like I have joked with you before on Listen Up A-Holes that like, is there an intergalactic war one time in Marvel? That's going to be the thing that dominates the Avengers for 15 years. Is there a war with sentient colors from the fifth dimension in the DC universe? That's Tuesday. It's just scale. The scale is wildly different. And in fact, when DC is dropping the ball, it is doing what longtime comic book blogger Chris Sims calls the problem, capital T, capital P. And the problem with DC is when they want to be Marvel and they don't do a great job at it. And I'll let that hang. Anybody who wants to hear more about that can just come find me. I have lots of more thoughts about the problem when DC pulls off the problem. So
it's so interesting to me because Marvel, again, when we did Listen Up A-Holes, talking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it was the cinematic universe. Like we were watching the movies, we're doing things. You were reading the comics. You already read the comics. You know everything about the comics. So I was just kind of learning it secondhand from you, but I wasn't actually reading the original comic stories. So for me, like it was just kind of a different introduction, I think, into it. Now for talking about Sandman, we're looking at the comics, and it's so funny because I find things that are rubbing off on me, things that I learned watching you tell me about the comics from Marvel. Like for instance, and I'm very, very proud of this, and I know that you are very, very proud of me, because we were reading the Sandman comic, and they brought up Wesley Dodd, the guy who ran out and fought crime, and I was like, oh, Golden Age! It was a Golden Age Sandman, and I was so proud of myself. And then I went and I did the research on it afterward, and I pulled it into the episode, and I have been patting myself on the back for just recognizing that is a reference to, kind of like another incarnation of Sandman that happened in this world of the Neil Gaiman comic because Sandman was abducted, was captured. So I just wanted to ask you the question, how proud on a scale of 1 to 10 are you of me that I saw that and figured it out?
Man, you got to turn it to 11. That's how, because you were like, not just, this is a particular thing, because I think you started to get pretty good at recognizing things that were going to be Easter eggs, even if you didn't know, what they were related to. And so you're like, that's a guy. And it's not just a guy. It's a guy that was in actual publication during the Golden Age. Like we're not retconning something into the Golden Age. Oh, by the way, I, Lonnie Diane Rich, know what the Golden Age of comics is. And recognize this dude with a gas mask and a fedora. It was great.
Yes.
And then I responded to this fantastic revelation in the way that I always do, with a reading recommendation, because coming out near this time with Gaiman's Sandman, they did a book about Wesley that was extremely like gritty, like very true to what the 20s and 30s would have been like, and called it Sandman Mystery Theater. And it was fantastic. It's really an excellent series. It's one of the first series of any comic books that I got my wife to read when we were relatively newly married people, and she was not into any of that jazz. That ship has sailed. She's not into that jazz like I'm into that jazz, but she's more in there. And Sandman Mystery Theater is fantastic. So I recommend it. And also, props to you, and hooray, you're also, I'm going to steal a little bit of your possible notice things thunder, but you should actually be on the lookout for a version of the Silver Age Sandman also.
Oh my goodness. I will keep an eye out for it. A version of that. Yeah. I mean, we've, like at this point in the reading of the Neil Gaiman Sandman, they are pulling in from the universe, which is such an interesting thing. And I love this because Neil Gaiman pulls from everywhere, like he pulls stuff from mythology, and he pulls from like all of these, like ancient sources. And then as much will pull from, other things going on. Like we met this Martian person from the JLI, and Scott Free, who is somebody or whatever. Like, I don't know any of this. I don't have any of that background. But as we're reading it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is an internal reference. This is internal continuity. This is taking the material that is there, that has already been created, and repurposing it in what you're doing now. And I found it kind of fun. I mean, I think it's the kind of thing that had I known who Scott Free was, or who the Martian dude was, I'm sure.
You're gonna before I'm done, but go on.
Better. I'm sure would have landed even better. But being able to see these things and be like, oh, that's definitely something that's from the comics. And whenever I see that, I go and I do the research, and I find out that yes, indeed, it is.
Yeah. Do you want to hear about the Justice League International and the Martian Manhunter?
I do. Yes. Explain all that to me. I don't know that background. Yes.
Okay. This is that. I mentioned I was a Marvel kid until till college, and that is mostly true. But there was some dabbling around in the DC universe by me in kind of the late 80s and a little into the 90s, you know, but I didn't really go hard for it until late 90s, 2000s. But I was reading Justice League International. The thing about JLI is that it's post-crisis. And the only thing I will say about that is that it's after they kind of rebooted the DC universe for the most part. And there was so much stuff going on with their big names, the big headliners, like Superman and Wonder Woman, that they were too busy. Like they were legitimately like doing too much with those characters to let them go to the Justice League book, which, as an aside, is kind of a historical throwback. Originally, like Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman were not in the Justice Society of America because they only put people in the JSA that didn't have their own books. So if they were like reserve members, and they might show up every now and then, and they were on the roster because it would be weird if they weren't, but they hardly ever showed up. And there wasn't really an in-fiction explanation for this. But when other JSA characters got their own books, they exited the JSA. That was how they did. So circling all these years later to the JLI, they want to do very much a more international, like they were located in France, I think. They had an embassy. They took more international heroes because they just didn't want to be the Justice League of America only anymore. They were trying to take out a worldwide view. And if you look at the original lineup, it's weird because they weren't allowed to have any of what you would consider the big obvious poles, right?
Right.
So the original lineup is Batman. Batman's in it, but that's largely because Batman editor Denny O'Neil took pity on the JLI squad and were like, okay, you can have them, but don't fuck them up. That was a real deal. Denny O'Neil, I love him. And I mentioned him before as someone along with Neil Adams who really revitalized Batman in the 70s. And then when he became editor of all the Bat books, he got extremely protective. And a lot of times that was really cool. And sometimes it was really stupid. Like he insisted that the world thought that Batman was an urban legend easily 15, 20 years after that made any kind of sense. You know, I'm like, that guy's in the Justice League International. He's in pictures. Nobody disbelieves the existence of Batman. Come on. So anyway, so you got Batman, you got Black Canary, who's very much in there to be like the feminist perspective, honestly, to greater and lesser degrees. It was a time, but she's very much in opposition to Guy Gardner, who was the resident Green Lantern, who was a very like Reaganite, bowl cut, conservative, right-wing douche nozzle with a Green Lantern ring, you know. I'll just spoil this. One of the most famous scenes from early JLI is when Guy lips off to Batman and Batman knocks him out, just smooth knocks him out. And everybody flips out because it was like in one punch, you know, that's a whole thing. The Blue Beetle, who was a recent acquisition for DC Comics. They did not own him for a long time, but he shows up in JLI. Captain Marvel, now known as Shazam, was in there, and that was a weird pull because he had been owned by DC for a while, but had not been folded into the main universe. He was off in his own sort of pocket thing. You got Dr. Fate, a magic guy. You got Dr. Light, who is a female good version of what had been a villain. Dr. Light had been a Titans villain for a long time. And then Mr. Miracle, who sometimes brings along Big Barda, which is his wife. That's Scott Free. Boy, will we talk about Scott Free in a minute. And then last but not least, the Martian Manhunter, who, by the way, until fairly recently, was the only DC character that had been a member of every single incarnation of the Justice League. That was true.
Oh my goodness.
Until fairly recently. Yeah.
Wow.
So he's sort of been like,
he's somebody I've never heard of. Like we saw him, okay. Let me just, when I say because he's somebody I've never heard of, that's stupid because I haven't read most of this, but like, you've heard of Superman, you've heard of of Batman. I've heard of most of these, like even, like some of them in the like, but the Martian, Like I don't know that they've been referenced in any of the TV shows or the movies
Yes.
or any kind of like the main. I don't remember okay. And again, I am not in any way exhaustive. Like I watched, on reruns after school, the Adam West Batman when I was a kid. I've
Hell yeah,
watched
you
the Christopher Reeve superheroes, Superman movies. Like, I've seen the basics of it, but I don't like The Martian was just like a completely out of left field kind of character for me to find in Sandman. It was interesting. Mm-hmm.
Well, he's only in there because Morpheus had to visit the JLI, right? And
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Other than Batman, who honestly came and went because he had things to do and Denny O'Neil was protecting his investment, right? Like,
yes. Mm-hmm.
Martian Manhunter really is very much the grown-up of the JLI. And the JLI is part of what is now referred to as the blah-ha-ha era, because it would lead up to these huge jokes that were made in fiction, like on the page, until everybody on the page is busting up with big blah-ha-ha. It would be really serious and then be these really funny moments. And the grown-up in the room when Batman wasn't there is J'onn J'onzz, the Martian Manhunter. But he didn't really make a big multimedia breakout until the DC Animated Universe's Justice League cartoon, which would be in like the early 2000s. And
right. So that's after Gaiman's time of writing this and referencing it there.
Yeah. And that's the first time he's really busted out of the comic books, as I recall. And what's funny about that is my mom, she grew up with me dealing with this bullshit my entire life, right? And I bought some of these Justice League DVDs for my nephews for Christmas one year. And we're watching them, Christmas Day at my mom's house. And she comes in the room and she's like, I know who all of these people are except for the green guy. What is that about? And I was like, funny enough, the Martian Manhunter, who you have never heard of, is the only guy who's been a member of every iteration of the Justice League. And yet you've never heard of him, even living in a house with me. So you can be okay with that. Do you want to know his deal?
Yeah,
okay.
Of course.
Okay, so his deal is, and he's kind of like Black Widow in this way. You remember I talked about how Black Widow just became a person who stopped moving on the sliding time scale of the Marvel Universe?
Yes.
And so now she's just always been around, and that makes a certain amount of sense. This is kind of what they wound up doing with the Martian Manhunter. So remember, it's the Silver Age. It's the 60s. Everybody is getting science fiction reboots, right? So the Flash, the Golden Age Flash, was kind of a science fiction-y origin, but nothing like Silver Age Flash is the one you're familiar with, Barry Allen,
right?
Chemicals, lightning, the whole deal. Green Lantern stopped being one guy with a magic ring and instead became a Green Lantern Corps, like a galactic cops, basically, with science fiction-y stuff, right?
Yeah.
The way how this bleeds over into Martian Manhunter, remember, it's just barely after the 50s. We're still in the space race. We still think little green men might be on Mars, low-key, right?
Right, yeah.
So they have a scientist named Dr. Erdl who's working on interplanetary travel via gate, like a big wormhole gate kind of thing. And he thinks he's going to Mars, and he pulls a Martian out. And what they come to realize is that he actually pulled him from the past. There is no one living on Mars now. This is the last Martian because Mars was having a plague and everybody was dying. And so the only reason that J'onn survived is because he accidentally got pulled through this gate. And then Dr. Erdl promptly drops dead of a heart attack because he wasn't expecting this horrifying green monster to come through.
Yeah.
Right? Dies of a heart attack. And now you're left with J'onn J'onzz trying to figure out his place in the world, more or less all by himself, which he did with like television. And he decided he would be a crime fighter because Superman's out there, Batman's out there, and he doesn't have a normal identity. So he creates police detective J'onn J'onzz.
Oh my God.
And shapeshifts because he's got basically all the powers of Superman plus telepathy and shapeshifting. Like he is a powerhouse dude. And so he would just like create memories of J'onn J'onzz in people's brains. Now, wildly unethical, but he didn't entirely understand the Earth mores, right? Because everybody on Mars is telepathic,
because everybody has that ability there.
Everybody has a natural, like the powers he has are the powers everybody on Mars had, right? Like everybody is just rolling deep, So anyway, so that's his deal. And then so that happened in the actual Silver Age, but then as they kind of did these reboots where they would reset the clock, right? So that Superman didn't show up in 1939. Now he showed up in 1985, but they left Jean as having fallen through in the 50s or 60s. And he just built this life and hung around until superheroes became a thing. And then he was like, okay, now I can do it both ways. Like I can do both things. Yeah. So yeah, he's great.
Oh, that's a neat story.
Yeah. And he really is, it's just really fascinating because he's like an ex-cop, but he doesn't have an actual secret identity. So sometimes he maintains multiple different civilian identities just to learn how the world works. Like he's been a Chinese woman for a long time. He's been John Jones for a long, Detective neat. John Jones for a long time. Yeah. He's been all these different things. During my favorite time of the DC universe, they would talk about how Superman was the by far most widely known superhero in the Northern Hemisphere in the DC universe, like in the actual DC universe. Martian Manhunter was that for the Southern Hemisphere. Like he just went where the rest of the people didn't, because he didn't have a city to be the boss of. He didn't have family or, supporting cast or whatever. So, and then of course he makes a perfect addition as the more or less leader of the Justice League International, because he is the most well-known international superhero from jump.
How cool is that? I really like that. Of course, one of the things that I love the most about superhero comics is the endless parade of identity stories, which is essentially what a lot of them come down to. So that's really, really cool. All right. So here we are. Now we can move into the territory that I'm actually now starting to become familiar with, which is, of course, Neil Gaiman's Sandman work. And so, first of all, you've read this before. Right.
Yes,
so had you already read Sandman? Did you read it when it came out?
No, I was probably just a little young for it, or at least I thought I was. I thought I was. Yeah, no, I came to that later, like as a young adult. I came to it like in my early 20s, I think, is when I finally got around to it the first time.
All right. I've heard,
fantastic.
Nothing but amazing things about this run, and I'm very, very excited to get into it. I'm really enjoying it so far. One of the things that we talk about a lot is the incredible density, with which Neil Gaiman in general is a very dense writer. There aren't a lot of words that are just thrown away with Neil Gaiman. Everything kind of feeds in and links up with everything else. But also I think that in addition, comic books in general and the way that I'm experiencing them now are a dense medium. You'll have I don't know, what's in an average issue, 20 pages, 25 pages, something like that.
Modern comics, 20 to 25 pages throughout most of my life.
Yeah. So, 20 to 25 pages is actually not a lot, except that in comics, they kind of are. There's so much between the art and between the efficiency of the dialogue and the way that everything is written and the way that everything's put together. There's so much happening. And I find myself moving through this material very slowly, very deliberately, which is not usually what I do. Usually my time is so tight with everything because I schedule myself into the next year that I usually end up kind of rushing through. When I've got just text on a page, I move through it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But when I'm dealing with comics, I find that there's so much information packed into everything, all the way down to the way that the panels interact with each other on a page. So interesting, and I'm really, really enjoying that. So what did you think? Do you feel, and I don't know, because you've read so many comics, and I've read a couple of graphic novels and a couple of things. There were a couple of things that you had me read. You had me read Mighty Thor when we were doing the Marvel podcast and that kind of thing. But do you find, are the Neil Gaiman Sandman comics, do they feel different from other kinds of comics? Is there a different vibe to them? Or is this pretty much standard for the way that DC comics are, do you think?
Oh, I wouldn't claim it's standard at all. I do think that it kind of set something of the standard for Vertigo books. Vertigo is an imprint for DC. I believe that Alisa has talked a little bit about this.
Yes, she has.
But that's where they put their more more adult, I guess, and sometimes
Mm-hmm.
extremely adult. Like,
Mm-hmm.
for instance, the Endless start out pretty obviously as part of the DC universe, and they kind of get cycled out because they're just
Yeah.
too mature, like in a real way for what we want to do on a month-to-month basis in the DC universe.
Mm-hmm.
And then later they get kind of folded back in. In fact, I can't really talk very seriously about it, but I want to make both you and Alisa read when you're done. You have to be done with the comics because there's big spoilers, but I want to make you read 2 issues of Grant Morrison and Howard Porter's run on Justice League because it ties into the Endless stuff. And at the time I was like, wait just a damn minute. They're not supposed to be in the main universe. This is rules are being broken, which was cool. Very cool. So I will say that it feels very much like a Vertigo book, which would have been like Swamp Thing, John Constantine, Hellblazer, Sandman's Big Sandman Mystery Theater, which all tend to be pretty mature, have more sort of mythological or bigger themes, and then also can become just these really dense pieces of fiction because there's so much stuff we can rope into any given panel, let alone page. So yeah, I would not say that that's typical for comics across the board or DC Comics in particular. It comes up some, certainly. But I mean, that wouldn't be the right approach for a really breezy, action story.
Sure. It's not always what you want to do, but I'm just finding it so interesting because like I'm a big Neil Gaiman fan. I've really enjoyed his work. But I'm curious how the Sandman comics as written by Neil Gaiman kind of compare to the general experience of reading these comics. And I guess there is a different kind of audience for different comics. I mean, the universe is so broad. There's so much that it encompasses, same as the Marvel Cinematic and the Marvel Comics universe as well. But it's interesting because I'm finding myself, this is a very good, I think, access point for me for the rest of the comics. Because I really do enjoy the way Neil Gaiman's like the Doctor's Wife is one of my favorite episodes of Doctor Who, of course, written by Neil Gaiman. So there's something about the way that he writes that really typically speaks to me and the way and the things that I like to read. So it's a really good access point for me. We're in the middle of Preludes and Nocturnes now. We're almost finishing that up in the next couple of episodes of Endless. And then we're going to be moving into Doll's House. And my understanding from Alisa is that there is somewhat a shift of the way that the story starts out sort of in this horror space and moves into fantasy. Did you notice that as well when you read through Sandman? Do you feel that sort of tonal shift in there?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and in fact, I'm not exactly sure when in Doll's House. Even in Doll's House, I feel like
it may not be Doll's House. It may be after that, but she said there's like a tonal shift coming.
Yeah, definitely. You start to spend more time with Dream's supporting cast, with Morpheus's supporting cast, all of whom are basically different types of stories, really, when you get down to it. I mean, even you've already seen this a little bit with Cain and Abel. That one's the House of Secrets and one is the House of Mysteries, and that they, as Alisa was mentioning, they used to be hosts of books called that, So, I mean, there they are, just purveyors of stories. And I think if this is a little spoilery, I apologize because I can't remember where things go, but I think that, have you met Matthew the Raven? Not yet.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think I have. Yes.
Yeah. Well, he's coming and he's going to, it's going to suggest that there's this big backstory for him as Matthew as a Raven. And you're going to, you would be coming to me and being like, what's the backstory? Is it tied to a bunch of stuff? And I'd be like, you're going to have to wait. Cause no, and you're going to get some more horror type stories with some of the, cause I think Morpheus has already mentioned some folks that wandered off from their post in the dreaming, and sometimes that's for mischief, and sometimes it's for self-improvement, and sometimes it's just to go do horrible shit to people. So but yeah, no, it really does float through this like horror fairy tale back again. What's the meaning of stories? We come back around to horror. We're going to make William Shakespeare an actual character in the book. And one of my favorite issues, which this is the most basic bitch thing for me to really like, but I didn't know it at the time. One of my favorite issues is about Shakespeare doing a play or Morpheus and some of Morpheus's friends.
Oh,
and so it's a bunch of mortal actors doing a play for Dream and his immortal friends. And that individual issue, as I understand it, won an award that they then changed the rules so that no comic book could ever win that award again, because some people were really upset about it. But it's super layered and dense and literary and all this stuff. And so, it moves through these different spaces. I don't think very often that the horror elements go away entirely, if only because, as you guys have already seen, you've talked about, every time Dream shows up, everybody's like, what the fuck is this? You know, I mean, really, every time it's like Old Testament angels, you know, from, you know, angels, every time they show up in the Jewish scriptures, everybody just hits their face, you know, and the first thing the angel has to say all the time is get up, you know, and it's a little bit that with Dream. Like, Dream comes wandering into the JLI and Scott Free is like, I don't know you, but I know you're trouble, you know. Because I'm also a god and game recognized game. And then when he runs into the Manhunter's like, hits his face, you know, because he is a god of dreaming for Mars. So if nothing else, that inhumanness of Morpheus and his siblings kind of keep a low level horror vibe to me through most of it. But it really, like, all over the place, warp and woof, just different stories. I'm just going to tell some different stories, you know.
Well, I am really excited to be reading more of this, and I really appreciate you coming to hang out today so we could talk about this stuff, because it is it's really, really fun. And I always, as you can tell, because we name check you multiple times in every episode, because there's always a point where I'm like, oh God, I wonder what Joshua would have to say about this. So we'll definitely be having you back to kind of like talk about, you know, bring your expertise and your experience of all of these superhero comics. But the one question that I have for you before we leave here today is, Sandman a superhero? I know you have like very specific things, right? But okay, let me see. You've told me before what makes a superhero.
Well, hold on.
The only one.
You have to answer this question first. So yes, I want to quiz you. You tell me what makes a superhero according to me, but then you have to tell me which Sandman you're talking about.
I'm talking about this Neil Gaiman Sandman.
Morpheus.
I'm talking about, what's that, Morpheus? I mean, he's got so many different names.
Main names: Dream, Sandman, Morpheus. So if you need to draw a distinction
Sandman, Morpheus. Okay.
between, say, Morpheus and Wesley Dodd, you say Golden Age Sandman or Morpheus, right? Like, let's keep the line in there, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And here is the fact that I didn't prepare for this conversation absolutely showing itself. And my incredible shame, because you have been so generous in teaching me all about this stuff. And I had you on Still Dead to talk about the television show Angel and whether Angel was a superhero. And we had this whole conversation. And the only thing I remember is that superheroes have a costume.
Okay, so let me revisit this very briefly.
Yes.
So I do have a certain, you must be this high to be a superhero kind of requirement, right? And not all of them have to be turned up to the same level, okay? And I will explain what that means. But here's my bare minimum. You got to have superpowers, okay?
Yes.
Now, clearly, I love Batman, and he doesn't have any superpowers. He covers the other stuff. Right? Like, we'll
covers
get to
the
it.
other stuff.
Yeah, because all of it can be...
also secret identity, right?
Yes, they have to have a colorful costumed identity. Yes.
Okay, that's where the costume comes in.
Yes, superheroes wear costumes, man. If you need to call them a uniform or an action suit to make you feel more grown up, what the fuck ever. But at the end of the day, they wear a brightly colored, ridiculous outfit.
Okay.
It's a must.
So is the costume about the identities, like the secret identity space?
Yeah.
Or okay.
Because that's another thing.
The reason
they
why
have
they
to
have
be
to have
hiding
a
a
costume
civilian identity.
Is because they're hiding a civilian identity. Okay.
Now,
All right.
Again,
so
the knobs can be turned up and down on this, because the Fantastic Four are clearly superheroes, but they do not have secret identities, right?
They just are who they are.
They just are who they are, because they cover a lot of this other stuff. So yeah, the reason that the colorful costume is such a big deal to me is if you go back to sort of the original conception of Superman and also just watch kids, okay? Because kids are absolutely fascinated with the switch between the civilian identity and the superhero identity. This is why that slide down the bat pole was part of every single episode of Batman 66. Like, we had to see it. They're Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson up top. They slide down the pole. Batman and Robin were done. This was built into my son's Batman Lego sets. Like, you set your little Lego Bruce Wayne at the top, hit the button, he gums down the thing, boom, he's Batman instead. Like, this is a big deal. Transformation scenes in magical girl anime, like Sailor Moon gets, and all of her mini Sailor Senshi get these superpowered, these transformations. They don't wear masks or anything. And yet when they're done, nobody can recognize them because they're completely different. Right. So they got to have that. And for me, the secret identity is really important because that shift from who I am every day versus who I want to be or who I want to present to the world, right? In whatever manner that or form that takes. Like, Lois Lane would love Clark Kent if only she knew that Clark Kent was also Superman, but I have to keep this secret. So now it's this weird love triangle versus Spider-Man when he's like, I got to keep my secret identity because when this mask comes off, people fucking die.
Yeah.
You know, like there can be all kinds of reasons and not everybody has to have one. But at the end of the day, colorful costumed identity, hiding a secret identity. Okay. And they fight crime. Now we can broadly describe crime. Okay. But they fight crime, which also wears colorful costumed identities. You're not much of a superhero if you don't have any supervillains. In my opinion, I'm looking at you, MCU, for a variety of reasons. And this is where I start to get really specific for me. Okay. I think it's really vital for superhero stories that you battle internal conflicts literalized externally. Okay.
Okay.
So I have a Superman example I always use and a Spider-Man example I always use. Okay. So Spider-Man example is Aunt May is sick. She needs the pills. Peter goes to the pharmacy. He's got the pills in his hand. That direction, east, is his aunt whose health is failing and she needs these pills. To the west is the Scorpion breaking up a bank and stealing all the money and putting people in danger. Okay. With great power comes great responsibility. He has a responsibility to the people and to his aunt. Which one's the greater responsibility? Can he pull off both? Internal conflict, literalized externally, often with somebody wearing an equally garish outfit. Okay.
Okay.
And this is a big one for me. They also have to be aspirational. They have to be better than us. Superheroes they don't have to be perfect. Perfect is not what I'm looking for. Perfect is boring, but they are aspirational. They do not, I don't know, just snap villains' necks in front of, civilian families while they're saving their lives. They don't beat people nearly to death just for kicks, that kind of stuff. They don't do that largely. Can there be some examples that do these things? Yeah, as counterpoint. But if that ever becomes the main thing, barely a superhero.
Then it's no longer a superhero. Okay, so Sandman, right?
Sandman, Morpheus.
Morpheus, I would say, is not a superhero. Am I correct?
A superhero. Not a superhero.
Okay, let me go ahead and give you my reasoning why. One,
yeah, hit me.
He has only one. I mean, he has a number of names, which he is called, but he has one identity. He's one dude. Right. So he doesn't pretend to be anything else.
His identity is only multifaceted because we are. He is always Dream. And who he appears to us Earthlings as versus Martians versus whoever else. That's because of us. Yeah. So
but he never tries to be anything other than what he is. He also doesn't really fight crime. Like, I mean, he has a job
in the universe, in the multiverse, really. But no, it is not largely fighting crime. No,
it is not fighting crime. He has a dark side. Like, there's some real darkness to him. So I'm not sure how aspirational he is. I do like this thing that I'm seeing, though. Like, it started with the scene with Constantine and Rachel at the end where they were in the house and he says, Rachel's going to die. And he was just going to leave her there to die. And Constantine says, no, you can't do that. And so then he gives her like dreams that help her pass on. And he clears up Constantine's memories of bad things that have happened and everything. And he helps him out with that. And he kind of, from that moment forward, sort of starts using that power to help people. But one of the interesting things that Alisa had pointed out was that it was less about the helping and more about the power, that he knew that he could do that
Yeah.
And that power to do something was something that he was playing with, but that he's not an aspirational good guy. It seems to me like he has a lot of moral ambiguity.
Yes. Yeah. No, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I do, obviously these stories are superhero adjacent, 100%, right? Which is fine. Not every story in a superhero universe has to be a superhero story. Sometimes it's really interesting just to put things in contrast. The Jessica Jones, her original appearances in Alias, where she's an ex-superhero that barely anybody remembers, and was that good for her life? No, it was bad. Is it helping her get along now that she's not a superhero? No, it was bad. But you see that contrast, right? This is sort of that power differential the other direction, right? Like superheroes are largely the gods of their universe as far as we, the readers, are concerned. Like we're sitting down to hear these stories of these mythological big stories about Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. Yes, they have to have a human element for us to dial in on, but that's what we're tuning in for. So if they're the gods, what is a story like where they're instead more like middle management? And there's somebody so far above them.
Yeah.
Like, what does that mean to the superhero universe that you have this being, and then we find out about Dream's siblings, but you have this being that is operating exponentially higher than even the Justice League, whereas the Justice League is operating at a level exponentially higher than us. What in the hell?
Yeah.
So that's really, I think that's part of it too, is that he's really supposed to be superhero adjacent for that scale. Like take the DC versus Marvel scale and now say the Endless versus DC scale. It's like that big a jump. So I would say definitely not a superhero, but that's not a complaint or a problem. It's because they're telling different stories.
This is the kind of story they're telling.
Yeah.
Right.
And part of it is
and
that contrast. It comes in, but it's not the point all the time.
Right. And I'm not, saying he's not a superhero as any kind of criticism of it. It's just me trying to exercise this newly obtained information and this rubric. I mean, the last thing, I think the thing that I didn't talk about was that, does he have superpowers? Well, clearly Morpheus does, but that's not the only defining thing that creates a super. And he doesn't really have a super villain or anybody that he's actively fighting. It's interesting kind of how he dances into, like, say, hell, right? And hangs out with Lucifer for a little bit, and they have their little kind of jazz nightclub, mind game.
Yes, the Beat Poet Wizards War is very entertaining.
Poet Wizards War and I Am Hope, which is a really nice ending for that. I mean, I think that was a really, really great move. But yeah, it was an interesting conversation. I was like, okay, I'm going to ask him this question, and then I'm going to reveal that I have forgotten everything he's ever taught me about this. But now I've learned it again, and I will try not to forget the next time that I bring you on to anything I do to ask you if somebody is a superhero. I will try to have all of that information handy.
I have a follow-up quiz.
What's your follow-up quiz?
What about the Golden Age Sandman? Is he a superhero?
The Golden Age Sandman. Okay. Wesley Dodd. He has a secret identity.
He does.
He goes out and he fights crime. He has a costume. I don't know about a counter villain because I haven't read anything. I just kind of looked him up. I saw the reference to him in there. And his powers are, he's got the gas mask that makes people the gas that makes people either pass out or tell the truth or whatever. So I would say yes, Wesley Dodd, Golden Age Sandman, is a superhero. Am I correct?
No. But
why?
Your thought process is excellent. The thing is that you have a few characters, especially at DC, because DC's roots go all the way back to 1939, right? So you have a class of character that I generally describe as the mystery man, who
I forgot about the mystery man.
Right? They're pulp heroes, like the Shadow, the Spider, Doc Savage to a lesser extent. He's a little more like a hero pulp than a mystery man, but at the beginning you had this weird in-between space, right? So Superman is clearly not a mystery man. He's a brand new thing. He's a superhero. And somebody says, how do we make a mystery man into a superhero? And the first answer is Batman. Batman is the Shadow with a better outfit. To the point where Shadow stories are plagiarized almost whole cloth as early Batman stories. Also,
okay, so wait.
Bob Kane's a hack, so fuck that guy. But
Okay, so Shadow is a mystery man. They make him, they reimagine him as a superhero, make him Batman. But Batman's superpower is being really, really super rich, right? I mean,
Batman's
basically.
superpowers, in as much as he has them, have kind of like bounced around a little bit depending on what our needs were. He's almost always been the world's greatest detective, which not technically a superpower, but one hell of a protagonist power, you know?
Yeah.
And in fact, without going all into a whole thing, when you have an opportunity to see the difference between the way Batman approaches a problem and the way J'onn J'onzz approaches a problem, there have been really great moments where somebody's like, well, Batman's not here, let's just get J'onn to figure it out. And John's like, I'm a manhunter, not a detective. That shit is different, you know. Later on,
I love it.
Gadgets and things become a big deal. So yeah, to an extent, being rich is part of the power, because it gives you the time to do these things, the access to these kinds of things. Most of the time, I would say Batman's power, if he has one, is competency. Like, if it can be done without superpowers, he can probably do it. Another way that this gets reflected is people will argue a lot about he can win any fight as long as he has time to prepare. Well, that's clearly bullshit. Okay, I'm not even going to deal with that. But the preparation side, yeah, that's a real thing. There have been multiple Justice League stories where they get taken out because somebody uses Batman's plans to take them out. Why did Batman have plans to take out his friends? Because mind control's a thing, motherfuckers. You got to be ready for shit. And when they said, well, what was your big ass plan if you got taken over? And his answer was, you guys.
All right, so the mystery
to return
man
to Sandman.
and the mystery. Okay, so Sandman is he a mystery man?
Yeah, you have these handful of characters
or the
that
original
are kind of
Wesley
existing
Dodd
in a middle space. Okay, so you have the Golden Age Sandman, who is very much a mystery man, hat, fedora, trench coat. Not a real costumed identity, just a different name and a gas mask, right? So the Shadow had like 9 multiple identities. He didn't have one that he went back to. The Spider only had one, but he didn't really have a costumed identity. He dressed up like a monster, like an actual like hunchback witch's nose, you know, thing. So another example of this would also be the Crimson Avenger. Like, again, it's just like a red domino mask, but otherwise it's fedora, trench coat, you know, stuff like that. Mystery Man. When you get to the Silver Age, you get a Silver Age version of the Sandman and of the Crimson Avenger that are much more superhero-y on purpose. Like, they realize it was an experiment to start with. We weren't exactly sure where was the line for superhero. Okay, those guys are still on the other side of it. They're still in the Mystery Man side. Now it's the Silver Age. What do we do to them to bring them into an actual more superhero
so
space?
Is that the difference between Golden Age and Silver Age? The Silver Age is sort of this transitional space between what we had in the Golden Age and what we were moving into with the really bombastic superhero kind of thing?
Well, no, not necessarily. I mean, it is a liminal space. It is a switch over, but it's a switch over both in time and in storytelling technique, and also in sort of the themes that you were going to start getting. I mentioned a lot of magic guys become science fiction guys because it was the 60s and it was the space race. And it was, you know, Barry Allen being a scientist was sexy business. Whereas the Golden Age Flash being a scientist was a little ho-hum. You know, just with the approach of what the kids were into, you know. This is also why not only do you get a more science fiction-y explanation for Green Lantern, but he also becomes a test pilot, because that's the sexiest fucking thing you can be in the 60s.
All right. Interesting. I'm going to keep my eye out for the Silver Age Sandman. I'm looking very forward to kind of seeing that appear. Joshua Unruh, thank you so much for joining me here today to have this conversation. I could talk to you about this forever. For anybody who found this information as interesting as I do, where can they find you and all of your superhero business, all the podcasts and everything that you do? WTF Golden Age, by the way, I think is one of my favorite things that you do. Where folks, I'm telling you, go find it on your podcast app of choice. It is where he goes deeply into all of these Golden Age characters and ideas and themes, and it is so much fun to listen to. But you've got tons and tons of superhero content for people. Where can they find it?
So you can find all of my superhero all of my podcasts, the ones that are mostly about superheroes and even a couple that aren't, at pulpdiction.biz. So that's diction with a D.biz. I also write stuff, you know, and I'm working on some superhero stuff, but I haven't written a lot of superhero stuff up till now. I'm working on it. but you can find all the writings at joshuaunruh.com. That's joshuaunruh.com, JOSHUAUNRUH.com. That's all the writing stuff. I did do some Mystery Man stuff, though. That is not there because I did it with a co-writer, with Dan Swinson, fantastic fantasy author that I know. We did a bunch of Mystery Man stuff at EmpireCityAdventures.com. We released those serially originally. We're almost ready with our big giant compilation of all those stories. So maybe hold off, maybe buy the first issue. And if you like it, wait for the big giant tome because it's a coming. Yeah,
it's coming. All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for hanging out. And everybody, Alisa and I are going to try to get these out every week as we can, but due to personal circumstances, that may not be possible every week. So we ask for your patience. If we end up missing a week for any reason, go visit Joshua. He's got a million things going on there. If you love comic books, if you're interested in any of this, and I find all of this incredibly fascinating, go find all of his stuff and let his material tide you over while you're waiting for the next Endless podcast episode to drop.
And let me just throw these gates wide open, is that anytime you need to fill in, but you have time for another one of these, I am happy to come back because I didn't even get to spend any time gushing about either Mr. Miracle or Etrigan the Demon. And I have feelings about these characters.
Yes, we've got more talking to do, but we are absolutely out of time. Thank you so much, Joshua. Always a joy to spend time with you. And for everybody listening, we are going to be back with the next episode, which is Preludes and Nocturnes, covering issues 6 and 7, which is 24 Hours and Sound and Fury. So that's coming up next week, hopefully. But Joshua will definitely be coming back. In the very least, we're going to be name checking him in every episode when we're like, oh, I wonder what Joshua would think of this. So thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who's listening, and we'll see you next week.